Good afternoon. I'm Mike Hearn, the Douglas Dillon Chairman of the Department of Asian Art, and it's both an honor and a privilege to stand before you today to welcome our speakers, to welcome all of you, and to celebrate the recent opening of Mandalas, Mapping Buddhist Art of Tibet. This is an extraordinary exhibition that our Associate Curator, Kurt Berendt, has spent many years preparing, and he's done a terrific job. I think the more than 100 objects, which include sculptures, texts, musical instruments, arms and armor, as well as a plethora of beautiful thangkas, both embroidered, woven, and painted, makes this the most sumptuous gathering of Tibetan art, I think, that's been held perhaps forever, but certainly for a very long time, and we're very proud to host it here at the Met. For those of you who haven't visited it yet, it's located in the Lehman Pavilion on the lower level, and that's quite fortuitous because the atrium of the Lehman Pavilion has been turned into a mandala, and you'll hear more about that today from its artist, Tenzing Rigdol. So I must say that Kurt is very sorry he can't be here with us today. I'm very pleased to take his place, and I know he would want me to especially thank all of the both institutional and private lenders who have contributed to making this such an extraordinary gathering of works of art. We're also very grateful to the Placido Arango Fund and the Lilly Endowment, Inc. for supporting the exhibition, and the beautiful catalog is published with the support of the Florence and Herbert Irving Asian Art Endowment for Publications. So this afternoon, as you can see on the wall, is going to feature 3 speakers. Each will come and make a 15-minute or so presentation here, and then the 3 speakers will sit together and can have a discourse between them and also invite questions from the audience. Our first speaker then is Christian Luczanits. He is the David L. Snellgrove Senior Lecturer in Tibetan and Buddhist Art at the School of Oriental and African Studies at the University of London. Christian completed his PhD at the Institute of Tibetan and Buddhist Studies, the University of Vienna. He focused there on art and art historical topics. He then held research positions at the University of Vienna, the Austrian Academy of Sciences, and the Lumbini International Research Institute. He went on to hold visiting professorships at UC Berkeley, the Free University of Berlin, and Stanford University. While teaching in Berlin, he also co-curated an exhibition in Bonn with Michael Jansen titled Gandhara, The Buddhist Heritage of Pakistan, Legends, Monasteries, and Paradise. And he was responsible for that catalog. He continued his curatorial work as senior curator at the Rubin Museum of Art in New York from 2010 to 2014, before taking his current position in SOAS in London. Please forgive me for not reciting all 90+ publications that Christian has anchored over the past 25 years, but these show his wide-ranging interests, notably early Buddhist art during and after the Kushana period from the 1st to the 5th centuries, and also early Tibetan Buddhist art from the 7th to the 15th centuries. Specific topics that he's focused on include representations of the Bodhisattva and future Buddha Maitreya and their relationship to the development of Mahayana Buddhism, the development of Indian esoteric religious forms and how they were adopted and adapted in the formulation of a distinctively Tibetan Buddhist canon, and his in-depth research into the iconographic programs and monastery collections at a number of major Buddhist temple sites, particularly in the Western Himalayas, including Alchi, Tabo, and Mustang. We're also most grateful for Christian for his contribution to the Mandalas catalog. Our second speaker, David Gray, is the Bernard J. Hanley Professor of Religious Studies in Santa Clara University. Professor Gray received his BA in Religious Studies from Wesleyan University and his MA and PhD from Columbia. And that PhD was in the history of religion. His research explores the development of tantric Buddhist traditions in South Asia and their dissemination in Tibet and East Asia, particularly the Yogi Tantras, a genre of Buddhist tantric literature that focuses on female deities and yogic practices involving the body. 2 of his important publications treat the Chakrasamvara Tantra, an esoteric Indian Buddhist scripture that serves as the basis for a number of important Nepali and Tibetan Buddhist traditions. In 2007, Columbia University Press published the Chakrasamvara Tantra, a study and annotated translation. This was followed in 2012 by the Chakrasamvara Tantra, editions of the Sanskrit and Tibetan texts, also from Columbia. More recently, in 2015, Columbia published his Tsongkhapa's illumination of the hidden meaning, mandala, mantra, and the cult of the yoginis. Journal articles include imprints of the Great Seal on the expanding semantic range of the term mudra in the 8th through the 11th centuries in Indian Buddhist literature, and also on the very idea of a tantric canon, myth, politics, and the formation of the Big-Ur. Finally, we are privileged to welcome Tenzing Rigdol, the Tibetan-American artist responsible for transforming the atrium of the Lehman Wing into an immersive mandalic environment at the center of this wonderful exhibition. Rigdol was born in 1982 in Kathmandu, Nepal. He completed his education at the University of Colorado, Denver, at the College of Arts and Media, from which he holds a master's degree in philosophy and a BA, BFA in art and art history. In 2022, the University of Colorado Board of Regents awarded Rigdol its highest honor with an honorary doctorate. Tenzing Rigdol is known for his thought-provoking art and art installations, fostering cultural exchange and dialogue. His works have been exhibited worldwide, as exemplified by his work on view at the Met, which he has titled Biography of a Thought. Rigdol is known for his expertise in Thangka art, in which he blends Tibetan heritage and modern artistic expressions. One of his notable projects, using 22 tons of Tibetan soil from Shigatse and bringing that soil to Dharamshala, was his effort to indicate the continuing connections between the Tibetan diaspora and the soil and home of Tibet. In 2013, he collaborated with Tibetan filmmakers and contributed to a documentary entitled Bringing Tibet Home. He established the Dialogue Artist Residency to encourage collaboration between Tibetan and international artists. And as if his achievements in visual arts was not enough, Rigdol is also a poet with 3 published volumes. Please welcome our speakers, starting with Christian Luczanits. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike, for this wonderful introductions to all of the speakers this afternoon. Thanks also to this audience that came and express their interest in what we are going to talk about and the show on mandalas. In my short presentation today, I want to focus on the visual aspects of the mandala. And demonstrate how its development sheds light on the different forms that have come down to us in the Buddhist tradition. Thereby, we have to keep in mind that the mandala and its symbolism in a Buddhist context developed in the course of the period from the 6th to the 12th centuries. In India, as well as later then was transmitted to the entire Buddhist world, including Japan, but continued its transformation in Tibet. And that is important to keep in mind. So when we talk about mandalas today, what we have in mind is essentially the very complex mandalas that the Tibetan tradition has kind of brought down to us. And these have visual characteristics that we have become very familiar with. And in this case, we have 4 mandalas on the canvas. And of course, what unites them all. They have these outer circles, which are protective and purifying. They have a square palace with 4 doors, and they are distinguished by their interior, which also houses the deities that are invited into the mandala in the course of a ritual. But this particular mandala that we just saw is part of a set. And that set is called the Vajravali, the garland of Vajras, that was written in the 11th century, and that then was kind of transmitted together within the Tibetan tradition. Yeah? And that set consists of 14 paintings commissioned by a very famous scholar of the early 15th century, Ngorchen Khyentse, in the memory of his teacher. And in that set, the 4 mandala versions are part of it, but there are also 2 mandalas that are single mandalas only. And these are the most complex that kind of document the ideas with which Indian Tantrism, essentially, or Buddhist Tantrism, culminated in. And in particular, this one, the so-called Kala Chakra Mandala, the Wheel of Time Mandala. And in many ways, the Wheel of Time Mandala is considered the culmination of all Tantric teachings. And it is for that reason that it is the one that kind of is communicated even today by the Dalai Lamas, for example, through regular rituals. But already in the 15th century it takes this prominent position, and even in the 11th century, when this particular corpus of texts was created, it took a central position, and all the other mandalas are compared in relation to it. And that latter point is important. It's not surprising then that it's also the Kala Chakra Mandala that has been converted into a 3-dimensional model within the Potala Palace. And that's what we have represented here. The mandala itself can easily be recognized. It's, if we'll go back, if you look at the doors, they have these 3 floors with 3 compartments each, so 9 compartments that can easily be recognized and distinguish this particular mandala from others. And what you see here is something that I will later talk about, namely the in front of the mandala, you see different circles, water and the smoke of fire, for example, indicated here, which refers to the cosmos that mandala contains. But we'll come back to that. But these complex mandalas are to be contrasted with very simple mandalas that we'll find in the earliest evidence of mandala practice. And some of the drawings that were found in the library cave at Dunhuang document that, this simplest form of the mandala. And they make clear the actual purpose of the mandala as a ritual tool. Yeah, as a ritual tool, a kind of purified ground, purified and protected ground, to which I can invite the deities to take place momentarily or temporarily, and to harness their powers for different purposes. Yeah? And in this case, in this particular case, it's very clear that it's a healing ritual. So the deities are invited for healing. And this is typical for the early development of Tantric Buddhism, that it serves both secular aims, so to speak, as well as then increasingly so spiritual aims. And especially with the higher tantras, the spiritual aims take over. And what is characteristic for this mandala also is there is no circle around. It ends in a square, and it's exactly that tradition that then moved to Japan at an early period, and that explains why in Japan we don't have the circle around the mandala palace. And so there are kind of two integral parts of the mandala itself. It's the mandala palace, the habitation, and the deities that are invited into the mandala, the inhabitants of the mandala. Sorry. And it's the deities, their number, their qualities, and so on, that define the geometry of the mandala on the inside. And there's a particular form of the mandala that is called lotus mandala that we have here on the screen. That is a demonstration of the full alignment of the deities and the habitation, but the habitation here is reduced to the central lotus on which or in which the deities abide. And typically they can also be closed. Yeah, you can close them up, then you don't see the deity, and then at occasions you reveal the deities. This also indicates to us that in the original idea of the mandala, the word, the circle element in the word mandala actually refers to the center and not the surrounding shape. Yeah, so it's the central circle of deities that actually is referred to by the term originally. The ritual context of the mandala is also clear from the practice of making mandalas in colored sand. Sorry. So these go back to the fact that mandalas were built for initiation, for initiating a disciple in the new teaching, then inviting the deity, and then destroying the mandala afterwards again. Yeah, and the present-day practice of so-called sand mandalas replicates that process. And so it's much closer to the original ritual form. This is a particular mandala of the Bodhisattva Manjushri that we have here on the screen that was made at Emory University during a conference. And yeah, in the process of that week. I think I missed one, yes. The other kind of ritual context, or another aspect of the ritual context, relates to a group of so-called initiation cards that we find in the exhibition. So these are cards that are showing the different deities of the mandala, so what I call a mandala assembly. Yeah? These cards you have to imagine when a disciple is initiated into the mandala, the teacher will show them one by one in the right succession and read the texts on the back, read them out as part of the ritual. Yeah? And together they form the complete mandala assembly with the 5 Buddhas in the center and the protective deities on the outside. And so, in this case, you have a complete mandala assembly, and that is actually rare, that a Takali set, they are called Taklis, these initiation cards, is complete, as this particular example in the Metropolitan Museum of Art is. And it depicts the Vajrakuya mandala. So these deities are the same deities that are also represented in this particular Dunhuang painting, which shows that this mandala tradition is an ancient one, that it goes back at least to the 10th century. And what we also see here is an aspect of secrecy, because one of the real problems that we have as art historians researching mandalas is that first, they're a ritual tool of which nothing is preserved. It's only once they start to use it for different purposes, be it instructional, as many of the Dunhuang drawings are, or being kind of supplementary to rituals that actually focus, for example, on the color chakra. Then we get mandala depictions as such. So we have to kind of conclude back on a historical evidence that doesn't exist really because of the secrecy that is involved. And even then, when they become depicted, they may not depict the full thing. So one of the peculiarities of the Vajraguhya mandala is that here the couples are represented side by side, and not, as you will see in the exhibition, in later mandalas, in sexual embrace. But the symbolism is the same. But socially, it wasn't possible to depict them in embrace. So, in addition, I think there is, at a certain stage, the ritual mandala and what is the full mandala representation that is used for initiation, kind of separate from each other. Yeah, and we have a representation of a ritual mandala in a 12th century mural in Ladakh on the screen, and we'll see the circle, and we'll see there are not lotus blossoms, just flower blossoms on that table that document the seats of the deities. Thank you. I almost walked over there. Thank you. Another aspect then of the mandala practice is that once you are initiated into the practice of a certain deity, you are supposed to practice it every day. Yeah, and now, of course, you don't make a temporary mandala, but you visualize it. Now you have been introduced to it. And with Chakrasamvara, the interesting aspect is that in that visualization, you are supposed to visualize it within the channel ground. Yeah, and that is exactly what some of the early Indian and Nevari paintings depict, that they show a huge channel ground, and within that, the mandala is actually emerging. So it's an element of the channel ground itself is an element that comes from the visualization into the mandala depiction. And in my opinion, also the prongs that flank the door are a result of the inclusion of visualization practices, because you also imagine a purified Vajra cage within that, within which the entire visualization process happens. And of course, the channel ground, from a tantric perspective, tantric Buddhist perspective, is the ideal ground for Buddhist practice, because it reminds the practitioner continuously of the perishable nature of the human body. And that is exactly what's depicted in the corners around the mandalas, the different practitioners among corpses that are eaten by animals and so on. One crucial element that contributed to the appearance of the mandala as we find it today is the so-called Vajradhatu mandala that came up in the 8th century and defined the concept of the 5 esoteric Buddhas, the Buddhas that occupy the center in the cardinal directions. And here we have a much later version of that Vajradhatu mandala represented. And this mandala is so important, and the 5 esoteric Buddhas are so important, because in later tradition they are defining the color symbolism of the mandala. So each of these 5 Buddhas has a specific color he is associated with, and that color symbolism is then carried into mandala depictions that also those that do not contain the 5 Buddhas. Yeah? And so we'll see that, for example, in this early Nyingma school mandala of Chemcho Kheruka, that the quarters of the palace are in different colors. We have white at the bottom, yellow on the left side, red at the top, and green on the right side. And these are, the bottom is east, the eastern direction. Most of the mandalas, or in most mandalas, the east is the bottom because the deity is facing the rising sun. That's essentially the, and of course, with those colors, we have the 4 Buddhas that surround the central one represented, and the central one is the missing color, which in this case would be blue. And so Chemcho Kheruka belongs to the family of Buddha Akshobhya in this case. And this is what the texts talk about the different families that represent different qualities that the practitioner has to overcome, and that are represented then in the mandala itself. And you see that also through the prongs that flank the door. The only mandala that doesn't have any link to the 5 Buddhas is again the Kala Chakra mandala. The Kala Chakra mandala itself is, as I said before, a culmination of tantric Buddhist teachings in India, and it combines the mandala practice itself with the body of the practitioner, the microcosmos, and an imagination of a Buddhist cosmos as a macrocosmos. And so it's Mount Meru in the center of the cosmos that defines the color scheme of the mandala, and not the 5 Buddhas as in all other ones. Yeah? And that gives it its unique color scheme. And it's the cosmos itself that also is probably responsible that in a Tibetan context, then all mandalas become circular, yeah, at the end. Because what they depict, or the Kala Chakra mandala specifically, is based on the cosmic discs. We have seen them in the Potala Palace model before, much more distinguished. But here it's just the different colored circles around the central palace that refer to the cosmos. But so by latest around 1000, when the Kala Chakra teachings came up, when were communicated, mandalas had to become round on the outside. And this is something that influenced mandala depictions more broadly. So what we have documented here is this process of kind of continuous cross-influencing between the different mandala practices that are related to different teachings in the Buddhist tradition. And so I hope I could kind of demonstrate that through those examples, and how we can in turn learn from looking at these early mandalas how they were originally conceived, but also how they transformed over time until they formed this complete mandala as we have it represented today. But ultimately, we'll have to keep this kind of ritual function of the mandala in mind, and the fact that most of them were simply destroyed once they were used, as was the Manjushri mandala that we had at the Emory University at that time. So I hope that kind of triggered some questions that we can discuss later on. And I'll now hand over to David Gray. Thank you.
Well, I wanted to begin by thanking the organizers for inviting me here. It's a wonderful honor to be here. And unlike my distinguished colleagues, I'm not trained in either art history or art. Rather, my training is in textual studies of the Buddhist Tantras. Particularly, I studied the Chakrasamvara Tantra tradition, the root text or scripture of that tradition composed in India. I've studied the history of its interpretation in India and Tibet and the ritual and meditative texts associated with it. And I'm particularly interested in the contemplative dimensions of Tibetan Buddhist art. Although I'm not trained in art history, I was initially drawn into the study of Tibetan Buddhism through the art, the amazing complexity and richness of Tibetan Buddhist art drew me in as a young, first-year student at Wesleyan University many more years ago than I'm willing to say in numbers. But anyway, that'll be my focus. Now, I wanted to say briefly about Buddhist mandalas. They're a well-known, sacred image, probably the best-known type of sacred image coming from the Tibetan Buddhist traditions. And from a certain perspective, we can read them or understand them as aids for visualization, meditation practices that in the Vajrayana or Tibetan Buddhist tradition were understood to be essential for the achievement of awakening, the goal of the practice. We've already seen a number of mandala images. Here's just one other one from the exhibit, the Manju Vajra mandala. This is a tantric form of the great Mahayana Bodhisattva Manjushri, the Bodhisattva of wisdom. Now, the Sanskrit term mandala originally meant something like circle, and again, as Christian pointed out, the idea of a center and a periphery are kind of essential in this concept. Now, in medieval India, where Tantric Buddhism originated, one of the main meanings of the term mandala was the court of a king. The king at the center of an array of courtiers. It also came to designate in Indian and South Asian political theory the idea of the king or king of kings at the center of an abstract political world or universe, surrounded by the subordinate feudal lords to whom owed him allegiance. Now, Mahayana Buddhists appropriated this term and used it first to describe the court of a Buddha in a Pure Land, surrounded by the various courtiers. Here is a Tibetan image. Parts of my presentation got cut off with little identifying notes, but this is a Tibetan image of Sukhavati, the Pure Land of Amitabha Buddha, the Buddha of the Western direction, surrounded by a court of other bodhisattvas, in attendance in his paradise realm. Now, as Christian pointed out very nicely, as he noted, the mandalas that we see are typically 2D images of what are basically understood by the tradition to be royal palaces. So the 3D image, for example, of the image of the Kalachakra mandala at the Potala Palace is clearly recognizable as a palace, right? A palace inhabited by a central Buddha, surrounded by subordinate rings of other Buddhas and Bodhisattvas who are in attendance in his court. Now, in Tantric Buddhist contemplative meditations, one of the most important types of meditation are visualization meditations, in which you identify yourself with typically the central deity of a mandala. So you visualize yourself as a Buddha. The basic idea here is that, we may imagine ourselves to be ordinary beings, ignorant, full of the passions. But according to Mahayana philosophy, each and every one of us, without exception, possess something called Buddha nature, the innate capacity to become an awakened being. And there's actually nothing, ontologically speaking, that separates us from Buddhahood. The only thing that keeps us from it is ignorance, a failure to recognize our own, true nature. And so the practice involves, again, if you want to become a Buddha, you shouldn't see Buddhahood as something way out there in the far distance. Buddhahood, if it exists anywhere, is here and now in the present moment. So to become a Buddha, you have to see yourself a Buddha. And you have to transform your sense of reality, seeing yourself not as, say, ordinary person like me in this ordinary world, but as an awakened being within the awakened cosmos of a mandala, surrounded by other beings who are also awakened. So every single one of us, without exception, are awakened, and we simply need to transform our self-understanding. And so you do this through visualization practice. Again, I'm bringing up the Chakrasamvara image, in part because I'm biased, because I study Chakrasamvara, but also, as Christian pointed out, it has the lovely images of the charnel grounds on the periphery. And I wanted to bring this to your attention because, a notable feature of the Tibetan and tantric, art are sometimes what we might call macabre imagery. And this, again, comes from this idea of the charnel ground, the place where bodies are taken to be disposed of, cremated if you have enough money to afford the firewood, but if not, abandoned there, left to the jackals, the wild dogs, and so forth. In the medieval Indian imagination, the charnel ground was kind of like a Halloween horror show, filled with flesh-eating wild animals, with dakinis or yoginis, fierce female beings who kind of are the equivalent of, say, witches in the medieval European imagination. In other words, a terrifying environment, but the true tantrika, the true practitioner of tantra, is ideally a hero who goes to this very scary place and meditates and masters their own fear. This goes back to the time of the Buddha, as again Christian was pointing out. The Buddha recommended monks engage in what was called ashubha bhavana, meditation on impurity, go to the charnel ground, meditate upon a decaying corpse. Why? Again, to teach you very viscerally and profoundly the nature of impermanence, to help us overcome attachment to our own bodies, which is very real for all of us, as well as to the attachment to other people's bodies as well. So this idea of the charnel ground as a place of practice has a very long lineage in Indian Buddhism and of course in the art as well. Now, initiation into the mandala, again, Tibetan Buddhism, tantric Vajrayana Buddhism had an emphasis on secrecy. The practices to become a Buddha were not supposed to be widely taught or disseminated. Visualization practices supposedly can be dangerous. When you do these practices, you destabilize your own sense of identity. I'm no longer David Gray, the ordinary American human being, blah, blah, blah. I become, Hiruka. But without proper guidance, supposedly, this sort of practice can be dangerous and so shouldn't be studied on your own. You need to study with a qualified guru so the first step in the practice is to find a qualified guru and then to study under them. And then when they deem you ready, they'll initiate you. The initiation involves a mandala in ancient India, medieval India, as well as Tibet. It involves creation of temporary mandalas out of colored powders, ideally ground gemstones, but Tibetans typically these days use finely ground and colored sand. And during the initiation process, you're introduced to the mandala and introduced to the deities that you need to visualize as part of the practice. And again, the Tsakali cards were tools used in the initiation process to introduce the student to the visualization practices that they would need to undertake post-initiation. Now, an essential feature of any tantric Buddhist ritual is a figure known as the Vajracharya, which literally means adamantine master. probably is better translated as something like master of ceremonies, literally the master of ceremonies who runs the ritual. But a very interesting part of pretty much all tantric rituals, the Vajracharya necessarily as part of the ritual is supposed to visualize themselves as the awakened deity. So performing an initiation, the master of ceremonies at times visualizes themselves as the deity who is the central figure in the mandala to which students are being introduced. Now, tantric rituals often typically involve imagery taken from the iconography of the deities in the mandala, and many of these are, again, sometimes on the macabre, such as, for example, the skull bowls, which are a kind of important feature of a tantric ritual. The efficacy of the rituals is due to the Vajracharya's ability to successfully visualize themselves as an awakened Buddha and performing the rituals while in that kind of awakened state of mind. Traditionally, in the Tibetan tradition, to gain this kind of virtuosity, you need to go through a 3-year meditation retreat. 3 years of intensive meditation, learning to do the visualizations in a crystal clear manner and being able to hold those. Imagine performing an initiation ceremony. They typically take anywhere from 8 hours to 3 days in the Tibetan context, and maintaining crystal clear visualizations of the mandala while you're doing the ritual. Sounds impossible, probably to us, but again, if you go through that 3-year retreat, apparently it is not so, it's quite possible. So they say. I've never tried that. Again, here's a skull cup, a kapala, a ritual implement made from the top half of a cranium, used in many tantric rituals, and held by many tantric deities as part of their iconography. Now, there are also tantric dance practices in which deities of a mandala are invoked. These typically involve ornate costumes, music traditions, songs, and dance traditions, costume dancers dressing as deities, manifesting as deities. A very well-known tradition is the Charya Nrityam tradition of the Kathmandu Valley in Nepal. The Tibetans also had many, many different dance traditions. These too ideally involve visualization. So a dancer would learn not only the dance moves, the mudra or the gestures employed as part of the dance ritual, but they also would learn the visualization practices. Now, at the root of these practices are very archaic, ancient South Asian, Himalayan, and Tibetan practices of using dance to enter a state of possession. Ritual identification with the deity involving dance and music. These traditions are preserved in Tibet, with many, the oracle tradition, Nechung oracle, for example, who through music, dance, enter a state of visionary trance. But there's also the tantric dance traditions, in which the dancers wear elaborate costumes and masks, typically. Here's one image, monastic dance robe from the exhibit. In the exhibit, it looks much better because it's posed in a dance pose with the mask. So, please do check that out. Learning these dances, again, involves both the outer and inner disciplines of learning the dance techniques, but also being initiated and learning the visualization practices as well. Now, another contemplative practice that this exhibit touches upon is a practice called guru yoga, which is a kind of beginning type of visualization. It's often one of the first visualization exercises that people are taught when they study Tibetan Buddhism. It's a preliminary practice in which you view your guru as a deity surrounded by a lineage of masters going back to the distant past. And so basically you're visualizing your guru as embodying the lineage of awakened beings going back to the central awakened figure of the lineage, and then a long lineage of masters who brought those teachings from the distant past down to the present. Typically in these practices, you visualize the lineage gurus melting into the central figure, which is the guru identified with the central deity of the mandala, Heruka, in the Chakrasamvara tradition, for example, who then transforms into light, dissolves into your heart. Doing this visualization is thought to confer the blessings of the lineage upon you, enabling you to have success in the more difficult and arduous practices, such as learning how to visualize an entire mandala, and we do that well. There are a number of lineage paintings, such as this Kadam painting, often with a central figure surrounded by lineage figures from the past. Now, these types of paintings had a dual purpose. Their primary purpose was probably political, establishing a lineage of the current masters with the masters of the ancient past, and hence, establishing authority for the tradition as practiced at the time. But they may very well have had the contemplative aspect as well, as kind of pointing to students what they would actually need to visualize while doing guru yoga types of meditation practice. Now, lastly, I wanted to mention one final practice, which is something that I've been working on a lot myself, called body mandala practice. Now, when you do a mandala visualization, typically you visualize yourself as the central deity, surrounded by all the other awakened deities. In the instructions to these meditations, you're often told, and these types of meditation are called keirim, or creation stage visualizations. You kind of dissolve your sense of ordinary ego, your sense of being an ordinary person. You emerge as the central deity, and then you generate the mandala around yourself. This, again, is something you would learn over your 3-year meditation retreat, how to do this well, convincingly, with great mental stability. And the goal is not only to transform your own sense of identity, thinking, oh, okay, I'm not David Gray anymore, I'm, Sri Heruka. But not only that, you also have to transform your sense of your environment. The world around me isn't this dirty, dusty, dangerous, crime-ridden place, blah, 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 whatever my deluded mind imagines. In fact, it's the pure world of the mandala. And every being I encounter is a pure mandala being. No matter how annoying they might seem, even those pesky mosquitoes in Central Park, they're not bugs, they're actually bodhisattvas, buzzing in my ear to remind me of the need to develop patience and compassion. So when doing creation stage visualizations, you transform how you see yourself and ideally how you see the world around yourself. But there's a kind of further stage. That body, which we meditated on in the charnel ground, perhaps, if not realistic, not in reality, at least imaginatively. And the Buddhist teachings on the charnel ground meditations, Shuddhabhavana, they emphasize how disgusting the body is, filled with all sorts of nasty things, pus, blood, feces, urine, blah, 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 right? Really dwelling on the grotesque and the yuck factor. Again, to help us to overcome attachments to our own bodies and to other people's bodies. Self-cherishing and lust, for example. But in the body mandala practice, you actually throw all that out the door. It's still necessary, but in body mandala practice, you're taught to see your body as actually a microcosm, a kind of representation of the cosmos. Your body is the mandala palace, inhabited by all the mandala deities. And those mandala deities are associated with the various parts of the body. In the Chakrasamvara traditions, the goddesses occupy all of your organs, without exception. Everything from the soles of the feet to the top of the head, with everything in between. The male deities are identified with different elements or features of the body, including the urine, the feces, and so on and so forth. So your feces isn't crap anymore, it's actually a Buddha. Now, the reason to do this is, the idea is you're transforming your sense of embodiment into the idea of a kind of pure abode of light, inhabited solely by awakened beings. And this is actually seen in many Tibetan traditions as a kind of important segue between the creation stage practices where you visualize yourself as a Buddha and your environment as an awakened reality of the Buddhas, to a type of visualization where you see your body as composed of light, filled with channels and centers of energy, the chakras, the nadis, or the channels that link the chakras together, filled with the winds of vital energy, lung or prana. And the practices that involve manipulation of subtle energy within your body, these are practices associated with the so-called highest stage of practice called the tsokrim, or completion stage. And these are the kind of highly, you might say, top secret, innermost secret of secrets within the Tibetan tradition. They're rarely talked about, they're rarely written about in texts. They're artistic representations of these practices are rare. They occasionally occur, but aren't all that common. So I just wanted to point out that the mandalas, too, kind of point to a way of transforming how you see yourself and reality, leading to these kind of advanced stages of practice. And that'll be the end, I think, for my comments. Thank you very much.
Thank you everyone for coming, and I have a very special, my professor James McLehany, my first painting teacher in 1999 from University of Colorado, Denver here, and thank you very much, sir. So thank you. Now my professor is here, so now it's very difficult to talk. But I'll try. And thank you so much, Mr. David La and Stephen La, for giving nice introduction about the Mandala and Tantra and all. And there's also, I think, a funny story like that in Mandala. So earlier we were all talking about serious thing, 3 years retreat, this. So once there was a really interesting yogi. His name was Telopa, Telopa. And his disciple is Naropa. Naropa's disciple is Marpa. Marpa's disciple is Milarepa. So there's like all this lineage. So this great master once wanted to give a very secret tantric teaching right away. And he said, like, right now, make a mandala. And the great master's disciple was Naropa. He didn't know what to do. He just lifted his skirt and he peed and just circled. And he made a pea mandala. And then his master says, wow, this is very auspicious, good omen. And then he gave a teaching. So in a way, really, this whole Buddhist images and all these texts and all these speeches are really trying to talk about the nature of our mind and how it can be studied. It's like a monkey that jumps from branches to branches, and then these yogis give you technique to give him a banana. And then once the monkey gets a banana, for 15 seconds, he stops and just starts eating banana. At that time, you observe. So all these, I think, images are like giving banana to your mind so that your mind sits still, and at that time, you can observe what happens to your mind and all this. But this is just my understanding. So in that, I think, I also use mandala as even Sanskrit word mandala. Man means manas, mind. Mandala means dal means also center of mind, or to put your mind into it, And Tibetans call it kilkor. Kil means center, and kor means the surrounding, And So all these things are basically talking about really challenging what is your center. Where do I end and you begin? So it's very interesting. So I thought it'll be interesting to use those kind of, in a very playful way. I usually talk about a difficult subject matter in a very playful and colorful way. In that way, I'm more inviting, and we can have a genuine discussion. And all paintings become more like a stage for your mind to dance. Then you come, and then I come, we participate, and when we leave, the image becomes something in our head, something else, So, and then I thought it'll be interesting. It also seems, I don't know much about Tantra and all those things. I just do little research. So I think, oh, it's really about thoughts, and how thoughts go, how thoughts modulates and takes different frequencies, and that affects our system of perception. So then I thought, yeah, so let's do how I can understand biography of a thought, So it'll be interesting if we have biography of many people, collection of thoughts together, put into one meaning. So I thought, let's look at thought, and and this happened, like so here, if I want to, then if thoughts are like the clouds, and it also seems like certain thoughts excite certain emotions, So I thought maybe I could treat the waves like the emotions, and then you have thoughts, and then thoughts and waves, and in between that we weave our stories, incidents, history, and we call life, and almost popping into existence, and floating in memory or already happening. And then also, as David and Steve said, the tantric, one of the traditions, very secrecy, hiding. There's lots of, it really demands the participant person who's participating to really give 100% in the process, And the reason they have 3 years, 3 months, 3 days meditation is, the real idea is, according to Kongtrul Rinpoche, he would say, the reason is there are certain energy channels within us that throughout this thousands of years, everyone intermittently, throughout historically, has said, yes, there are certain subtle energies that's running within our body. And somehow, this energy, if we can understand, it somehow expedites the process of all this beautiful thing that our professor was saying, to understand those different dimensions of awareness. So this is what their discussion is. So here I just present one layer of just the natural phenomena and all, and also talk in one straight, just from a one look, maybe it's about environment and all this. But I do talk about how different religions talk about the same kind of Judaism talk about this this light that God created, which even prior to even sun and everything. So similarly, they talk about breath, ruha, and in Sanskrit we have Atman, same thing, breath, And I think there are lots of, all these religions, from my understanding, they are really signaling us in different ways, like telling us like there's some amazing thing within our body. You guys just a little distracted outside, just come look inside. So, so I just play with this idea, and here I just talk about probably if mind goes really wild, and if all these things happen, then we have a world like this, And I talk about gun violence, a little bit about Twin Tower, Hiroshima, Nagasaki, Floyd, and have Dalai Lama with the hat debating, and of course the first self-immolator in Vietnam. And the Kala Chakra is there at the center, supposedly the final teaching of Buddha. Yeah. And so, and this is the third panel. So basically there are 4 panels around it, and then the carpet. So I would just go to the central piece and then talk directly how I visualize. So basically, I thought it'll be interesting. All these Buddhists, when they really talk about 2 different kinds of stabilizing your mind. They talk it like calming your mind, and then having an insightful wisdom or something. So I thought I'll separate the whole installation with carpet as the idea of calming your mind, whereas, and then around it you have all this installation. And I picked blue as a color to calm you down. And so I'm not very good at just talking. I'm better at responding. So I think we have Q&A, yeah? So I would stop it right here. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot. About kind of one of the. Sorry, you understand me? Okay. One of the interesting aspects I think that came through these different presentations is that regardless how much we try to understand the mandala, it's always too complex for any one mind in certain ways. And partially, of course, this is its history. The fact that we have all these different tantric transmissions that all are, in the end, different. Each, in a Tibetan context, these would be different doors to the Buddha's teachings, or different pathways that were given to us in a certain way. Another kind of crucial aspect is this kind of secrecy element, and that would be my first question to both of you in terms of, I would like to take that as a theme, and then I would suggest that you'll ask questions to the other speakers as well, and then we can open up for some questions in the audience. So I was thinking about, secrecy in terms of the visual evidence. It's very hard to find anything visual as long as teachings are secret. So for example, the only way I can know that esoteric Buddhism was practiced at a particular place in India at a particular time is if I find just the deities that link it to a tantric text that involves the making of a mandala, for example. That's the only way I can assess, for example, that, at the Ellora, the later caves relate to esoteric Buddhism. And I think that secrecy, of course, makes it very difficult to trace the history of those ideas, but we are lucky that the Japanese tradition branched off earlier, and so we suddenly get an earlier stage. But within each of those, we have a commentarial, a teaching process that is in between, also because it serves a purpose, and that purpose is in the foreground. So in terms of visuals, I'm always behind with my evidence. I wonder how that is with texts and how you feel the interpretation of the texts, David. kind of transforms over time, and or partially what is the secrecy that is expressed in texts?
Thank you, Christian. I primarily study texts, and one of the things that really interested me is this concept of secrecy, because the texts are always invoking this, but yet by invoking it, they're also kind of making a public statement, right? So, in other words, the secrecy was always an open secret. Or at least the tradition advertised itself as an esoteric tradition with secrets to teach, secrets about how to become a Buddha in as short as one lifetime, for example. So the secrecy was kind of like public, but yet there always was something that was hidden, right? And what I found very interesting studying the text is you can look, diachronically across time, and it becomes quite clear, at least in the Chakrasamvara tradition that I study, that the secret changed. Now, the Chakrasamvara tradition is also a tradition with a lot of erotic elements, and in the earliest texts, it was quite clear the big secret was the sexual aspects of the ritual. But later, I found out, and for later commentators, sex is no longer the secret, and there are deeper secrets that become, the true secret. So in other words, over time, there's always a secret. That's what remains the same, but the exact nature of the secret, changes as the traditions develop and grow, through cultures and across time and space. So that's one thing I've discovered through textual study.
And that is, of course, then what we also have in the art. First, it's not depicted, and only once they don't consider it secret anymore, they depict the deities in sexual embrace. And so it's not, but the fact that they depict it tells us, oh, now this is not the main thing. Yeah, and I find that aspect of it very interesting. And I was wondering in that respect, if you had any thoughts when you created your works, any thoughts that, things that you shouldn't include, or things that if any of that played a role?
I think I put everything in there about tantra, okay. But I think so. I think the first 5 panel actually is a pictorial tantric text, but you won't say it's quietly. I hide it pretty well. But I also think the secrecy is really out of compassion. It is not that they don't want to share the secret and I have this great thing and I'm going to take it away. So it is really every tantric text, whether it's a Hindu or Tibetan, everywhere, they say, be careful. Even especially in Shiva Sutra, all this Shivaji's texts, everything, you'll hear, like the first thing is, don't talk about this to anyone. I think it's more to do with, should I give gun to 10-year-old? So something like that. So I think, secrecy is really out of, I think, compassion. And even Marpa, you remember? Milarepa wanted to study, and for 13 years, all he did was he kicked him. He kicked his butt, he was beating him every time he wants a teaching, and last minute when he was going to commit suicide, when he's going off the cliff, that time when he calls him back, says, my son, come back. Now you're ready. So the secrecy like that. But also I did talk to some practitioner here and there. Yes, the texts are very, you won't see it depicted, the real discussion. That's why many times you will hear the discussion about Tantra, around Tantra, or about Tantra, but really not Tantra, because there's the aboutness of it, which most people talk. But then in the practitioner, they would have like a different scripture. Not only that, some scriptures are aligned in a wrong way, so that even if you can find the scripture, you need to decipher it because it's written in a very different language, like Thai, And even Mandala scriptures like Chakrasamvara, Guya Samaja, all the iconometry lines are written in poetry. So you have to understand the poetic language, you have to understand the Buddha's biography, sometimes they would say Ananda's punishment. Then we don't know how many punishment he was given, and then that means that number of measurement, you go left, right. So even in images too, even in the construction of mandala, every level there's a kind of secrecy or heedfulness or like carefulness, cautious. So they're very cautious about this technology, they think. So they, even in movies they show, there's this Rakshas would be meditating, and then some god would come and they would say, what do you want? I want to be immortal. And this, oh, you can't get that. And something they'll give, and right after he gets the power, he starts laughing, ha ha ha, and then he starts burning everything. So this is, I think, the first text of Tantra is telling, like, you can't empower someone who doesn't have the ground of compassion. So I think these two are related, I think. But anyways, yeah.
Yeah, definitely related. David, do you have questions to us?
Yes, I have a short question for each of you. Christian first. I was really glad that you included that three-dimensional mandala, Kalachakra mandala from Potala. But, you know, not being an art historian myself, I've always been under the impression that those 3D mandala images are quite rare, uncommon. I haven't seen that many. Well, I've seen so many of the 2D, you know, painted, you know, mandalas or flat, you know, sand mandalas. But again, I don't have encyclopedic knowledge, and I was just wondering, you know, given your wide experience of cataloging this art, how common or uncommon are these 3D mandala images?
They are actually quite uncommon, as you say. They are relatively rare, but they are often in contexts where a particular tradition is communicated, that is particularly strong at a particular place. I know of two Chakrasamvara mandalas as well, three-dimensional. One is in the Gyantse main temple, where the Lamdre images are and where the Mahasiddhas are represented, and that depicts Chakrasamvara. And actually the most fascinating early example is a temple in Tsaparang in West Tibet, where an entire temple is essentially a three-dimensional mandala where you walk in, or at least you can walk in and circle it, but you walk between the charnel grounds and the main deities of the mandala. Of course, it was damaged during the Cultural Revolution, but I think it still gives us a good idea how that was done. And yeah, what I always ask myself in relation to these is, what do they want to communicate? But it's the same as with the paintings. They create a permanent presence in a way, because as the paintings, you know, all these paintings are consecrated, and you invite the deities depicted into the painting, and you ask it to stay there forever in the course of the ritual. And of course, that creates this environment that communicates blessings to those that are able to walk into those spaces, which may not be public. I think that's another interesting aspect of secrecy in the tantric tradition, who actually had access to these places. Yeah.
Thank you. And Rigdol, I was just wondering, I loved how you made that connection between mind and water in what you were saying just before, and in your art. And as I'm sure you know, there's a long history of this in kind of Buddhist literature as well as artistic representations. You know, the imagery of the mind as water, you know, Mahayana idea of chitta santana, mind as a flow, mind as water, like a pool of water that's, when it's still, right, is clear and reflective, but then when disturbed, agitated, becomes, you know, unclear. In East Asian context, like the Platform Sutra, that's transformed into the metaphor of the mirror, right, which I think is derived from the water image, you know, the mirror, which is clear, but when it gets foggy or dusty is no longer clear. But I noticed in your installation, the waters are very roiled, like a stormy sea kind of waters. And the images you choose, historical images you choose, like Nagasaki, Hiroshima, and the like, are all kind of, or Twin Towers, with of course the suggestion of their, collapse, are very kind of troublesome modern events. So there must be a connection there, right? I'm sure there must be. And I was wondering if you could speak a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I was really, I thought if I'm really going to explore, because in the East, one of the most fascinating thing I think they figure out is correlationship between thought and breath. So they thought, oh, since birth, we have always been thinking and breathing. And somehow they're like skin and flesh, You pull the skin, the flesh comes out. They're all stuck together. So then they said, what happens when the breath is calm, And then they're saying, oh, interestingly, thought also frequency, the muddiness becomes also less, it starts decanting. So they say, oh, interesting. So in that way, I was also really exploring that different frequency of breath or thought produce different frequency of thought produces different world. So the second panel is really about difficult historical events, but it really does come from thought. It's not like somebody alien came and did this thing. So it's all our doing, and I'm exploring that. Even Patanjali says, it's basically what you're learning is you're learning chitta's, vritti's nirodha. You want to kind of form a discipline around your mind that is going wild, and then if you tame it slowly, and once like it becomes clear and clear slowly. So that aspect I was exploring. I was exploring the aspect of when mind is disturbed, and naturally we'll have disturbed world. So, but of course, also in text, there's a lot of use of image of Akash, the sky as awareness also. So, yeah, I played these two ideas in the second panel. Yeah, thank you.
Rigdol, do you have questions for us?
Yeah, what do you think about my painting?
That's a slightly unfair question as a whole, because it's too complex to explain. But as far as I get it from your comments, it's, as you say, it's all related to thoughts. And I think David very perceptively pointed out the roiling water in some panels, in contrast to the calm water in the last panel, if one sees it as a succession. What I haven't really completely thought through or thought about, that was more a question from me to you, is how you see the traditional mandala representations. How did you build them in, especially in terms of colors? I was just interested, and so I see certain elements in it. I see that you reference the 5 Buddhas through these lines that connect the different mandalas. I'll see that you do, for example, the different mandala quarters in different colors, but I'm not sure I didn't get what they are based on or what you express with them specifically, but it's very difficult to answer. Maybe you can take one example.
I think the first 5 were, even though it's not very like traditional, but I tried to have like a traditional element, like the first primary color, or have the doors, the east-west, all those things. But then right after the first panel, you start seeing everything, like just the circle also starts breaking. And after a while, I just went on my own. And the first 5, I wanted to just explain a little bit. And so basically, from my understanding, Tantra is really saying, like all this, you try to, basically, they're prescribing us to improve our attention. And once the quality of attention improves, then you can perceive. The perception is only after you have gathered enough attentive power. And then they're saying there are only 3 ways in my understanding. It's either a body, or a sound, or a breath. These 3 you can pay attention to. So you just put a stone or a dot or an image, and then you try to look at it. And when you try to look at it, you know that time how wild your mind is, because it won't listen to you, And then you're establishing a proper relationship with your mind. And then they say, once you're calm, your breath is, the gap between your 2 breaths like slowly widens, and then you stop breathing for a certain time. And at that time, now your breath is not there, they say. At that time, your energy is now just open now. And then depending on your karma, maybe you'll sit in one of the chakras. This is what they say. Thus have I heard. So yeah.
Just to answer the same question, I love your piece, and coming to it as a scholar of Buddhism, of course, I first made the kind of Buddhist connections. Oh, there's Kalachakra, there's Vajrayogini, there's Mahakala, there's Dalai Lama, there's Buddha in his deathbed reclining scene, although with earphones on. But it rapidly became apparent to me that there was a whole world of meaning that I was just barely touching upon. And I love the title, A Biography of a Thought, right? A biography, a life story, right? And thought like having a lineage or a journey or a story. Again, going back to that old Buddhist idea of flow of thought, flow of mind, water. So there's so much richness there, and I thank you.
And also thank you. And so we started right during pandemic, so it's 5 years. And so I really wanted to have really good water elements. So I decided the best way to go to the source. So I live in Astoria, so there's the Atlantic Ocean. So I just stared there every time. Sometimes few guys would come and think I'm a little crazy. Are you okay? I'm a couple of hours just staring at 1 feet. I just make 1 feet. I'm staring, and I'm trying to feel the water, wave. And afterwards, in the studio, I feel it, and then I go and then I try to. So yeah, it's Atlantic Ocean there from Astoria, and even in summertime, I was feeling cold because I'm just thinking too much about water or ocean. So, but yeah.
We can open that up to questions from the audience. If
raise your hand, I have a microphone, so we'll come around. We have time for, I think, 2 questions.
we'll get you.
I was very impressed with your work, and I love the fact that you use the blue so much. And is your blue associated with healing? Because there is also a movement. Also, I want to say that when you did your canvas and also match the rock in different tonalities, like in a lower tonality, like saying, this is my masterpiece, but then the rock is like the second copy of your masterpiece. So what are the emotions in your work? Is it serenity? Is it communication? Is it healing? What were you thinking to produce that incredible changes on blue, which is basically surrounding the 4 areas connected with the square in the middle.
Did you get the question? What were you thinking as you used multiple shades of blue and connected the middle with all the rug and the installation? Is that right?
Yeah, because rug is one of the really important Tibetan culture, and my parents and many Tibetans who came in exile in Nepal were doing rug business because that's how they knew what they could make and they could produce and go door to door, and that's how they started all this business. So I wanted to do something where I don't want to use rug as an extension of art, but really part of art. And I could do that in this project because it's perfect. Like here, you're really talking about 2 distinct ways of tuning yourself, where calming myself, and then whatever thoughts bothers you, bring that on your calm mind. So this aspect of calming yourself is the carpet. And it was done by really amazing, my fabricator is Jigmela, he's there, and his company, Mount Refuge, made the whole carpet. And and yeah, even the carpet, every wool, everything, we colored it. Like we didn't just had a ready-made wool and make it. So we made sure the color matches perfectly. And so we tested a lot, and I'm thank you that you like it. And yeah, so yeah, basically I think we did have some thoughts and all. Afterwards we just, the whole carpet, painting, everything was made with, it's like a chef who's cooked with great heart, and if it connects, thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I think one wonderful aspect of the rugs is, of course, that they connect the central mandala with the side panels and really make this a single work that is quite remarkable. May I bring the microphone here? Thanks. We do have to. Yes.
It's not so much of a, can anybody hear me? No. It's not so much of a question as an observation. You were talking about the fact that you live in Astoria. And do you know the name of that body of water between the East River and Flushing Bay? Hell Gate. Little historical detail, New York geography anyway. Well done, well done.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks a lot, everyone.
Thank you, sir.
I would just like to end by thanking our 3 very distinguished and very creative speakers, and for all of you for your interest in this. I think what the exhibition embodies is the very questions that have been posed this afternoon. How do we tease apart the complexities of a mandala, and Kurt Berendt's efforts to have the textual tradition with teachers, the bodhisattvas, the protective deities, the tantric deities, and then culminating with the complete mandalas is a kind of a roadmap. And I think Rigdol's work of art is also a map that we can follow. And as you said, having to control our minds is perhaps the most challenging thing we can do. You sit in meditation, you try to focus on your breath, but the mind is constantly interrupting you, like that monkey. You've given us all many bananas to chew on. Thank you. Great job.